Story number 1. Frozen Echoes in Wisconsin. I've always been fascinated by abandoned places, the way they hold onto fragments of the past, whispering secrets to those willing to listen. So when my wife, Emily, and I decided to escape the relentless grind of city life for a quiet winter retreat, the old wooden house in rural Wisconsin seemed like the perfect sanctuary. Nestled deep within a dense forest, the house promised solitude and a chance to reconnect with nature. Little did we know, it held a chilling history that would test the very fabric of our sanity. We arrived on a crisp December afternoon, the sky a pale gray as snow began to fall gently around us. The house stood alone, its weathered exterior blending seamlessly with the surrounding pines. Large windows reflected the muted light, and the front porch, though creaky and aged, exuded a welcoming warmth. Despite its isolation, the house seemed inviting, its presence both comforting and eerily silent. Inside, the house was a time capsule, furniture covered in white sheets, old photographs lining the mantelpiece, and a thick layer of dust in every corner suggested that no one had lived here for decades. Emily and I quickly unpacked our essentials, eager to settle into our new home. The first few days were blissfully peaceful. We spent our time exploring the nearby trails, enjoying the tranquility, and cozying up by the fireplace with hot cocoa as the snow piled higher outside. But as night fell, an unsettling feeling began to creep into our peaceful retreat. It started subtly, faint sounds that seemed out of place in the silent house. First, we dismissed them as the creaks and groans of an old structure settling under the weight of winter. However, the noises grew more persistent, evolving into distinct sounds that sent shivers down our spines. One particularly frigid night, as the wind howled outside and the snowstorm intensified, we began to hear the unmistakable sounds of children crying and footsteps echoing through the wooden floors. The cries were soft but haunting, a desperate plea that seemed to come from the very walls themselves. Emily clutched my hand, her eyes wide with fear as we tried to rationalize the sounds. "It's probably just the house," I whispered, though my voice lacked conviction. "Maybe there are animals out there." But the footsteps persisted, moving methodically from room to room, as if someone or something was pacing the halls. The cries grew louder, more urgent, filling the house with an oppressive sense of sorrow. Unable to bear the tension any longer, Emily and I decided to investigate, our hearts pounding in our chests. We followed the sounds to the basement, a dark and foreboding space that had remained locked since we moved in. With trembling hands, I fumbled with the key, finally managing to unlock the door. The basement door creaked open, revealing a room cloaked in darkness. As our eyes adjusted, we saw the remnants of a forgotten life, old toys scattered across the floor, faded photographs, and a broken rocking chair that seemed to sway gently despite the lack of any visible force. Emily picked up a photo of a family, parents and 2 young children, their smiles bright and full of life. A chill ran through me as I realized the weight of their gazes, the lingering sadness in their eyes. It was as if their spirits were trapped in time, unable to move on from the tragedy that had befallen them. Determined to uncover the truth, we delved into the house's history. The local library held sparse records, but with persistence, we unearthed old newspaper articles and town records. 30 years ago, the house had been home to the Thompson family, John, Mary, and their 2 children, Lily and Ben. During a particularly brutal winter storm, the family had mysteriously disappeared without a trace. Searches yielded no results, and the house was left abandoned, the Thompson family never to be seen again. The story sent chills down my spine. It explained the persistent noises and the eerie presence that haunted our nights. According to local lore, the spirits of the Thompson family were trapped in the house, reliving their final moments endlessly, their sorrow and despair binding them to the place they once called home. That night, determined to help the restless spirits, Emily and I decided to hold a memorial in the basement. We lit candles, placed fresh flowers on the mantel, and spoke words of remembrance and forgiveness, acknowledging the pain that lingered within the house. As we finished, a heavy silence settled over the room, the air feeling warmer, the oppressive cold lifting as if a weight had been removed. We sat together, hoping that our actions had made a difference. For a moment, the house felt peaceful, the haunting sounds ceasing as if the spirits had finally found solace. But just as we began to relax, the disturbances returned with a vengeance. The cries and footsteps resumed, louder and more frantic than before, as if the spirits were resisting our attempts to help. In a state of panic, we decided to leave the house, fearing for our safety. As we packed our belongings, the final signs of the past manifested before us. The rocking chair moved violently, the cries reached a fever pitch, and shadows danced menacingly across the walls. The atmosphere grew thick with despair, the spirit's anguish palpable and overwhelming. Desperate and terrified, we made our way to the front door, but it wouldn't budge. The house seemed to come alive, the walls closing in, the spirit's torment intensifying. In a last-ditch effort, we returned to the basement, hoping to find a way to free the trapped souls. As we approached the rocking chair, a ghostly apparition of John Thompson materialized before us, his eyes hollow with sorrow. "Help us find peace," he whispered, his voice a hollow echo. "We cannot move on." Understanding the depth of their suffering, we knew that our previous attempts had only scratched the surface. We needed to delve deeper, to understand the true cause of their anguish and find a way to help them let go. We spent the next few days researching, speaking with locals, and piecing together the events that led to the Thompson family's disappearance. We discovered that John Thompson had been a dedicated miner, working tirelessly to provide for his family during the economic hardships of the late 20th century. The winter storm that claimed their lives was unlike any other, its ferocity cutting off all communication and supply lines. Isolated and desperate, the family had taken refuge in their home, but the storm had overwhelmed them, leading to their untimely demise. Armed with this knowledge, we returned to the house with a renewed sense of purpose. We decided to perform a more comprehensive ritual, combining our previous efforts with the stories and memories we had uncovered. We gathered personal items that might connect us to the Thompsons, photos, toys, and handwritten letters, and laid them out in the living room. As we began the ritual, reciting prayers and speaking words of empathy and understanding, the atmosphere in the house began to shift. The oppressive cold lifted, replaced by a gentle warmth that enveloped us. The crying and footsteps softened, merging into a harmonious silence that signified the spirit's acceptance of our efforts. Suddenly, the apparition of John Thompson reappeared, this time with a peaceful expression. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice filled with genuine gratitude. The house seemed to breathe a collective sigh of relief, the shadows dissipating as light filled every corner. The spirits of the Thompson family began to fade, their forms dissolving into the warmth of the house as they finally found the peace they had long been denied. With the spirits laid to rest, the house transformed into a sanctuary of tranquility. The haunting sounds were gone, replaced by the comforting crackle of the fireplace and the gentle sway of the rocking chair. Now moving with the natural rhythm of the house, we felt a profound sense of accomplishment and relief, knowing that we had helped the Thompson family find closure. In the years that followed, the house remained a place of peace and warmth. Emily and I continued to cherish our winter retreats, the memory of those harrowing nights serving as a reminder of the enduring power of compassion and the importance of honoring the past. Emma and Jack grew up hearing the stories of the house's history, their innocence shielding them from the darkness that once haunted us. Sometimes, on the coldest nights, when the wind howls through the pines and the snow blankets the world in silence, I catch a glimpse of a faint light dancing in the window or hear the gentle creak of the rocking chair. But now, those signs are nothing but reminders of the spirits we helped to set free. Their echoes a testament to the bonds that connect us all and the healing that comes from empathy and understanding. Living in that old wooden house in Wisconsin taught us that home is more than just a place. It's a sanctuary where love, compassion, and respect for the past can transform even the coldest spaces into warm havens. And as long as we remember and honor the stories of those who came before us, their spirits will continue to guide us. Their whispers a haunting yet beautiful melody that echoes through the ages. Story number 2. Whispers on the Main Roof. I've always believed that the tranquility of a secluded home could heal even the most restless soul. So, when my wife, Laura, and our 2 children, Emma and Jack, decided to spend Christmas in a quaint wooden house nestled deep within the forests of Maine, I welcomed the idea with open arms. After a tumultuous year, the promise of pristine snow, towering pines, and silent nights seemed like the perfect remedy. The house stood majestically at the edge of an expansive woodland, its wooden frame weathered by years of harsh winters and relentless storms. From the moment we arrived, the isolation was palpable. The nearest neighbor was miles away, and the only sounds were the whispering wind and the occasional crack of ice shifting underfoot. Despite its seclusion, the house exuded a welcoming warmth. With a large stone fireplace dominating the living room and antique furnishings that Laura adored. Our first evening was filled with laughter and the comforting routines of decorating the tree, hanging stockings by the chimney, and sharing stories by the fire. Emma and Jack were thrilled with their new rooms, their excitement infectious as they explored every nook and cranny of the house. As midnight approached, Laura and I retreated to our bedroom, exhausted but content with the day's festivities. That's when we heard it. A series of heavy footsteps pounding against the roof. At first, I dismissed it as the house settling or perhaps the wind playing tricks on our ears. But the sound was distinct, rhythmic, and unervingly persistent. I glanced at Laura, her brow furrowed in concern. "Did you hear that?" I asked, my voice tinged with unease. She nodded slowly. "It sounded like footsteps. Maybe someone's out there," she suggested, trying to rationalize the noise. I nodded, pulling the covers tighter around me. "Probably just the storm. It's been really windy tonight." We tried to ignore it, convincing ourselves it was nothing more than the sounds of a cold night. But as we lay there, the footsteps continued, growing louder and more insistent. It felt as though someone, or something, was walking back and forth across the roof, their presence unmistakable yet invisible. The night wore on, and the footsteps never ceased. Each thud echoed through the house, a constant reminder that we were alone in the vast expanse of Maine's wilderness. Eventually, exhaustion overcame fear, and we drifted into a restless sleep, the footsteps lingering in our subconscious minds. Morning arrived with a clear sky and the promise of a bright, snowy day. As we prepared breakfast, the events of the night played on our minds, the unexplained footsteps leaving a lingering sense of unease. Determined to find answers, Laura suggested we inspect the roof for any signs of intruders or damage. Bundling up in our warmest coats, we made our way to the attic, the stairs creaking under our weight. The attic was a treasure trove of old belongings and forgotten memories, the air thick with the scent of aged wood and dust. We carefully examined the roof, the branches of pine trees scraping against the shingles, creating a symphony of sounds that mimicked the footsteps we had heard. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary, yet the feeling of being watched persisted. As we returned downstairs, Emma tugged at my sleeve, her eyes wide with curiosity. "Daddy, can we go outside and play in the snow?" I smiled, relieved to see her distraction. "Of course, sweetheart. Let's enjoy the day." The rest of the morning passed uneventfully, the children reveling in their newfound freedom while Laura and I attempted to shake off the remnants of the previous night's fear. We spent the afternoon sledding down the nearby hill, our laughter blending with the crisp winter air, momentarily pushing away the shadows that had taken root in our minds. As dusk settled over the house, casting long shadows across the snow-covered landscape, we returned to the warmth of our home. The fireplace roared to life, filling the room with a comforting glow. We settled into our usual spots, enjoying hot cocoa and recounting the day's adventures. But as night fell once more, the footsteps began anew, louder and more deliberate than before. This time, Laura decided we needed to investigate further. We can't keep ignoring this. Let's see if there's anything on the roof that might explain the noises. Reluctantly, I agreed, and together we ventured back to the attic. The storm had intensified overnight, the wind howling through the trees like a chorus of restless spirits. As we climbed the stairs, the sound of footsteps grew louder, almost as if someone was pacing back and forth above us. Reaching the attic door, we exchanged a wary glance before pushing it open. The attic was dark, illuminated only by the flickering light of a single bulb hanging from the ceiling. We scanned the area, looking for any signs of intruders or damage, but found nothing out of place. As we began to descend the attic stairs, the footsteps stopped abruptly, replaced by an oppressive silence. We breathed a collective sigh of relief, believing the disturbance had ceased. But just as we were about to leave, a cold gust of wind swept through the attic, extinguishing the bulb and plunging us into darkness. "Let's get out of here," Laura whispered, her voice shaking. We hurried down the stairs, our footsteps echoing in the silent house. But as we reached the bottom, the door slammed shut, the force of it shaking the house to its core. Panic set in as we realized we were trapped, the wind howling outside mocking our efforts to find peace. Desperate to escape, I grabbed Laura's hand and pulled her towards the front door, but it wouldn't budge. The storm raged on, the snow piling higher against the windows, isolating us further from the outside world. In the midst of our panic, we heard it again, the heavy footsteps, this time coming from the direction of the living room. Summoning every ounce of courage, I grabbed the nearest lamp and cautiously approached the source of the noise. The living room was empty, the fireplace cold and dark, the shadows dancing menacingly on the walls. But then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw it, a faint, ghostly figure standing by the window, staring intently at us. The figure was a man, his dress old-fashioned and worn, his face pale and expressionless. His presence was both terrifying and sorrowful, a manifestation of the pain that lingered within the walls of our home. I froze, unable to move, as he began to move towards us, his steps silent against the wooden floors. "Who are you?" I demanded, my voice barely audible over the storm's fury. He stopped, his hollow eyes meeting mine with an intensity that pierced through me. "Help me," he whispered, his voice filled with anguish. Tears welled in my eyes as I realized he was trapped, his spirit unable to move on from the tragedy that had befallen him. "What happened here?" I asked softly, my fear giving way to compassion. The room seemed to grow colder, the air thick with sorrow as he began to recount his story. I was alone, trapped in a winter storm. The snow was relentless, and the cold unforgiving. I had nowhere to turn, nowhere to go. In desperation, I sought refuge here, but the storm overwhelmed me. I couldn't survive the night. His words painted a vivid picture of his suffering, the isolation and despair that had driven him to the brink. As he spoke, the weight of his tragedy pressed down on us, the realization that we were living in a house haunted by his restless spirit hitting me with full force. Determined to help, Laura and I vowed to honor his memory and bring peace to his tormented soul. We began to research the house's history, uncovering old records that confirmed his story. John Miller had been a solitary man, a miner who had lived alone for years. His only companions the memories of a happier time before the storm had changed everything. With this knowledge, we decided to perform a memorial for John, hoping that our efforts would provide the closure he so desperately needed. On the following night, we gathered in the living room, lighting candles and placing flowers around the fireplace. We spoke words of remembrance and forgiveness, acknowledging the pain that had bound his spirit to our home. As we finished the ceremony, a profound silence settled over the room. The air felt warmer, the oppressive cold lifting as if John's spirit had finally found the peace it had long been denied. We sat together, holding hands, feeling a deep sense of connection and relief. That night, the footsteps ceased, and the ghostly apparition was gone. The house felt different, lighter, almost serene, as if a burden had been lifted from its very foundation. We slept peacefully, the shadows that once haunted our nights now replaced by a comforting stillness. In the weeks that followed, the house remained tranquil, the echoes of the past no longer haunting our nights. Emma and Jack thrived in the peaceful environment, their laughter filling the house with genuine joy rather than the echoes of past sorrows. Laura and I found solace in the quiet, our bond strengthened by the shared experience of confronting the house's dark history. But one evening, as we sat by the fireplace, basking in the comforting warmth, I noticed something remarkable. The rocking chair, a symbol of both tragedy and redemption, stood still and silent, yet emanated a subtle warmth, as if the house itself was finally at peace. I glanced around the room, sensing a profound sense of harmony that had eluded us for so long. "Do you feel that?" I asked Laura, a smile tugging at the corners of my mouth. She nodded, her eyes meeting mine with a shared sense of relief. "It feels like John and his family are finally resting," she replied softly. In that moment, I realized that our actions had transcended mere rituals. They had forged a connection, offering forgiveness and understanding to a soul long tormented by grief and isolation. The house, once a place of unimaginable sorrow, had become a sanctuary of healing and love. Years have passed since that transformative winter in Maine, and the memory of John Miller and the night we helped him find peace remains etched in my mind. The haunted footsteps that once echoed through our halls are now silent, replaced by the gentle sounds of nature and the warmth of family. Our home stands as a testament to the enduring power of compassion and the belief that even in the darkest of times, there is always hope for redemption and peace. Sometimes, when the wind rustles through the pines and the snow blankets the land in silence, I catch a glimpse of a faint glow near the window, a reminder of the soul we helped to set free. It's a haunting yet beautiful presence, a symbol of the bonds that connect us all and the healing that comes from honoring those who have been lost. Living in that old wooden house in Maine reinforced my belief that home is more than just a place. It's a sanctuary where love, compassion, and understanding can transform even the coldest spaces into warm havens. And as long as we remember and honor the stories of those who came before us, their spirits will continue to guide us. Their whispers a testament to the enduring bonds that connect us all, transcending even the harshest winters. Story number 3. Whispers in the Wind at the Appalachians. I've always been drawn to the untamed beauty of the Appalachian Mountains, their rugged peaks and dense forests offering both solace and a challenge to the weary soul. As an avid hiker and amateur photographer, the allure of capturing the untouched wilderness was irresistible. So, when a group of friends and I planned a winter expedition into the heart of the Appalachians, the promise of adventure outweighed any lingering doubts. Our group consisted of 5: Jake, the fearless leader with a penchant for storytelling; Emma, a wildlife biologist whose knowledge of the terrain was invaluable; Sarah, the pragmatic organizer ensuring we had all the necessary gear; Tom, the joker who kept our spirits high; and me, Alex, always ready with my camera to document our journey. We set out in late December, the air crisp and the landscape cloaked in a thick blanket of snow. The first few days were everything we had hoped for. We trekked through snow-covered trails, marveled at frozen waterfalls, and captured breathtaking photographs of the winter landscape. The nights were spent around a roaring campfire, sharing stories and dreams under a canopy of stars obscured by the swirling snowflakes. But as the days grew shorter and the nights colder, an unsettling feeling began to creep into our expedition. Started subtly, whispers carried by the wind, barely audible yet persistent. First, we dismissed them as tricks of the cold, our minds playing games in the isolation of the wilderness. However, The whispers grew more distinct, forming fragmented phrases that sent chills down our spines. One evening, as we sat huddled around the fire, Emma voiced what we were all feeling. "Have you guys been hearing that too? It sounds like someone singing," she said, her voice tinged with unease. Jake nodded, his usually confident demeanor faltering slightly. "Yeah, it's like a haunting melody drifting through the trees. It's beautiful, but it gives me the creeps." Tom chuckled nervously, trying to lighten the mood. "Maybe it's just a lost hiker with terrible singing skills." But Sarah was more serious. "Or maybe it's something else. We should keep our eyes open and stay alert." That night, the whispers transformed into full-fledged singing, a sorrowful tune that seemed to emanate from the very heart of the forest. The melody was hauntingly beautiful, yet laced with an undeniable sadness that resonated deep within me. Unable to resist the pull of the song, I found myself staring into the darkness, the snow swirling around me like spectral dancers. Suddenly, a flicker of light appeared through the trees, a faint glow that pulsed in time with the haunting melody. My heart raced as I realized it was coming from an abandoned cabin we had passed earlier in our trek. The structure was half buried in snow, its wooden frame weathered and worn by years of neglect. Curious and unnerved, I motioned for the group to follow me. We approached the cabin cautiously, the singing growing louder and more melancholic with each step. The door creaked open with a force that seemed to defy the stillness of the night, revealing a dimly lit interior. The air inside was frigid, the scent of mildew and decay hanging heavy. As we stepped inside, the door slammed shut behind us, plunging us into darkness. Emma's flashlight flickered to life, casting long shadows across the room. The walls were lined with old photographs and antique furniture covered in white sheets. In the center of the room stood a rocking chair, its motion synchronized with the haunting melody that filled the air. Frozen in place, we watched as the chair swayed back and forth, the floorboards groaning under its weight. "What is this place?" Sarah whispered, her voice trembling. Jake approached the rocking chair, his eyes scanning the room. "It looks like someone used to live here. Maybe it was a shelter during past winters." As if in response to our presence, the singing ceased abruptly, replaced by a deafening silence. The atmosphere grew tense, the air thick with unspoken fear. Suddenly, the window shattered, snow cascading into the room as a gust of wind howled through the broken panes. In that moment, a figure materialized by the window, a woman in a flowing white dress, her face obscured by shadows. "We never left," she whispered, her voice echoing through the cabin. "We're trapped here, lost in the storm." Emma stepped forward, her scientific curiosity battling her fear. "Who are you? What happened here?" The apparition turned slowly, revealing hollow eyes that seemed to pierce through my very soul. "We were lost in the storm. We couldn't survive the night. Now, our souls wander, searching for peace." Jake, ever the protector, grabbed Emma's arm. "We're not here to harm you. We just want to help." The woman's expression softened, a flicker of hope in her eyes. "Help us find our resting place. Only then can we be free from this eternal winter." Determined to assist the restless spirits, we decided to investigate further. Armed with our cameras and notepads, we began to search the cabin for clues. In a dusty corner, we discovered an old diary belonging to the woman Margaret Whitaker. Her entries detailed the harrowing experience of being trapped in a blinding blizzard, the despair of losing her family, and the inability to escape the relentless storm that claimed their lives. As we read through the final, frantic entries, the magnitude of their suffering became clear. Margaret had been a single mother, struggling to keep her family safe during one of the coldest winters in decades. The storm had isolated them, cutting off all communication and supply lines. Desperate and overwhelmed, Margaret had taken her own life and that of her children, unable to bear the weight of their suffering. Understanding the depth of their anguish, we knew that simply acknowledging their pain wasn't enough. We needed to offer them a way to find peace. we decided to create a memorial at the site of their tragedy, hoping that our efforts would bridge the gap between their tormented spirits and the world of the living. The next day, we ventured out into the forest, following the faint footprints leading away from the cabin towards an old, abandoned well. The well had long been forgotten, overgrown with moss and ice, a relic of a time when the town thrived on mining and logging. We began to clear the snow around it, placing candles and flowers as a gesture of remembrance. As dusk settled, the temperature dropped once more, and the haunting melody began to drift through the trees. We lit the candles, their warm glow reflecting our sincere intentions. Together, we spoke words of forgiveness and hope, honoring Margaret and her children's memories. Suddenly, the air grew still, and the singing softened into a gentle lullaby. The spirits of Margaret and her children appeared before us, their forms no longer distorted by sorrow but instead radiating a serene peace. Margaret approached the well, her hands reaching out towards it as if seeking to guide her family to their final resting place. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice filled with gratitude. "Now, we can rest." With those final words, the spirits began to fade, their forms dissolving into the night as the first light of dawn broke through the horizon. The oppressive cold lifted, replaced by a sense of warmth and tranquility that enveloped the forest. We stood there, watching as the remnants of the storm melted away, knowing that we had helped to free the restless souls from their eternal winter. As we made our way back to the cabin, the forest felt alive with a newfound sense of peace. The whispers had ceased, replaced by the gentle sounds of nature awakening to a new day. The haunting melody was gone, leaving behind only the memories of a night filled with fear, compassion, and the enduring power of empathy. Years have passed since that transformative winter in the Appalachians, and the memory of Margaret Whitaker and her children remains a poignant reminder of the thin veil between the living and the dead. Our expedition not only brought us closer as friends, but also deepened our understanding of the importance of honoring the past and offering compassion to those who have been lost. Whenever I find myself drawn back to the Appalachians, I carry with me the lessons learned from that haunting night. The mountains, with their majestic beauty and hidden sorrows, continue to call to those willing to listen to their whispers. And as long as we remember and honor the stories of those who came before us, their spirits will remain a testament to the enduring bonds that connect us all, transcending even the most relentless storms. Story number 4. Footsteps on the Vermont Roof. I've always believed that Christmas is a time for new beginnings, a chance to leave behind past regrets and embrace the warmth of family and tradition. So when my wife, Laura, and our 2 children, Emma and Jack, decided to move to a secluded wooden house in Vermont for the holidays, I welcomed the opportunity with open arms. The promise of pristine snow, towering pines, and the tranquility of rural life was exactly what we needed after a tumultuous year. The house stood proudly at the edge of a dense forest, its rustic charm accentuated by the thick blanket of snow that clung to its wooden beams. From the moment we arrived, the isolation was palpable. The nearest neighbor was miles away, and the only sounds were the gentle whisper of the wind and the occasional crackle of ice shifting under the weight of winter. Despite its seclusion, the house exuded a welcoming warmth, with a large stone fireplace that beckoned us to gather around and create new memories. Our first evening was filled with laughter and the comforting routines of decorating the tree, hanging stockings by the chimney, and sharing stories by the fire. Emma and Jack were thrilled with their new rooms, their excitement infectious as they explored every nook and cranny of the house. As midnight approached, Laura and I retreated to our bedroom, exhausted but content with the day's festivities. That's when we heard it, a series of heavy footsteps pounding against the roof. At first, I dismissed it as the house settling or perhaps the wind playing tricks on our ears. But the sound was distinct, rhythmic, and unnervingly persistent. I glanced at Laura, her brow furrowed in concern. "Did you hear that?" I asked, my voice tinged with unease. She nodded slowly. It sounded like footsteps. Maybe someone's out there, she suggested, trying to rationalize the noise. I nodded, pulling the covers tighter around me. Probably just the storm. It's been really windy tonight. We tried to ignore it, convincing ourselves it was nothing more than the sounds of a cold night. But as we lay there, the footsteps continued, growing louder and more insistent. It felt as though someone, or something, was walking back and forth across the roof, their presence unmistakable yet invisible. The night wore on, and the footsteps never ceased. Each thud echoed through the house, a constant reminder that we were alone in the vast expanse of Vermont's wilderness. Eventually, exhaustion overcame fear, and we drifted into a restless sleep, the footsteps lingering in our subconscious minds. Morning arrived with a clear sky and the promise of a bright, snowy day. As we prepared breakfast, the events of the night played on our minds, the unexplained footsteps leaving a lingering sense of unease. Determined to find answers, Laura suggested we inspect the roof for any signs of intruders or damage. Bundling up in our warmest coats, we made our way to the attic, the stairs creaking under our weight. The attic was a treasure trove of old belongings and forgotten memories, the air thick with the scent of aged wood and dust. We carefully examined the roof, the branches of pine trees scraping against the shingles, creating a symphony of sounds that mimicked the footsteps we had heard. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary, yet the feeling of being watched persisted. As we returned downstairs, Emma tugged at my sleeve, her eyes wide with curiosity. "Daddy, can we go outside and play in the snow?" I smiled, relieved to see her distraction. "Of course, sweetheart. Let's enjoy the day." The rest of the morning passed uneventfully, the children reveling in their newfound freedom while Laura and I attempted to shake off the remnants of the previous night's fear. We spent the afternoon sledding down the nearby hill, our laughter blending with the crisp winter air, momentarily pushing away the shadows that had taken root in our minds. As dusk settled over the house, casting long shadows across the snow-covered landscape, we returned to the warmth of our home. The fireplace roared to life, filling the room with a comforting glow. We settled into our usual spots, enjoying hot cocoa and recounting the day's adventures. But as night fell once more, the footsteps began anew, louder and more deliberate than before. This time, Laura decided we needed to investigate further. "We can't keep ignoring this. Let's see if there's anything on the roof that might explain the noises." Reluctantly, I agreed, and together we ventured back to the attic. The storm had intensified overnight, the wind howling through the trees like a chorus of restless spirits. As we climbed the stairs, the sound of footsteps grew louder, almost as if someone was pacing back and forth above us. Reaching the attic door, we exchanged a wary glance before pushing it open. The attic was dark, illuminated only by the flickering light of a single bulb hanging from the ceiling. We scanned the area, looking for any signs of intruders or damage, but found nothing out of place. As we began to descend the attic stairs, the footsteps stopped abruptly, replaced by an oppressive silence. We breathed a collective sigh of relief, believing the disturbance had ceased. But just as we were about to leave, a cold gust of wind swept through the attic, extinguishing the bulb and plunging us into darkness. "Let's get out of here," Laura whispered, her voice shaking. We hurried down the stairs, our footsteps echoing in the silent house. But as we reached the bottom, the door slammed shut, the force of it shaking the house to its core. Panic set in as we realized we were trapped, the wind howling outside mocking our efforts to find peace. Desperate to escape, I grabbed Laura's hand and pulled her towards the front door, but it wouldn't budge. The storm raged on, the snow piling higher against the windows, isolating us further from the outside world. In the midst of our panic, we heard it again, the heavy footsteps, this time coming from the direction of the living room. Summoning every ounce of courage, I grabbed the nearest lamp and cautiously approached the source of the noise. The living room was empty, the fireplace cold and dark. the shadows dancing menacingly on the walls. But then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw it, a faint, ghostly figure standing by the window, staring intently at us. The figure was a woman, her dress flowing and ethereal, her face obscured by the darkness. Her presence was both terrifying and sorrowful, a manifestation of the pain that lingered within the walls of our home. I froze, unable to move, as she began to move towards us, her steps silent against the wooden floors. "Who are you?" I demanded, my voice barely audible over the storm's fury. She stopped, her hollow eyes meeting mine with an intensity that pierced through me. "Help me," she whispered, her voice filled with anguish. Tears welled in my eyes as I realized she was trapped, her spirit unable to move on from the tragedy that had befallen her. "What happened here?" I asked softly, my fear giving way to compassion. The room seemed to grow colder, the air thick with sorrow as she began to recount her story. I was alone, trapped in a winter storm. The snow was relentless, and the cold unforgiving. I had nowhere to turn, nowhere to go. In desperation, I sought refuge here, but the storm overwhelmed me. I couldn't survive the night. Her words painted a vivid picture of her suffering, the isolation and despair that had driven her to the brink. As she spoke, the weight of her tragedy pressed down on us, the realization that we were living in a house haunted by her restless spirit hitting me with full force. Determined to help, Laura and I vowed to honor her memory and bring peace to her tormented soul. We began to research the house's history, uncovering old records that confirmed her story. Margaret Whittaker had been a reclusive woman who had lived alone for years, her only companions the memories of a happier time before the storm had changed everything. With this knowledge, we decided to perform a memorial for Margaret, hoping that our efforts would provide the closure she so desperately needed. On the following night, we gathered in the living room, lighting candles and placing flowers around the fireplace. We spoke words of remembrance and forgiveness, acknowledging the pain that had bound her spirit to our home. As we finished the ceremony, a profound silence settled over the room. The air felt warmer, the oppressive cold lifting as if Margaret's spirit had finally found the peace it had long been denied. We sat together, holding hands, feeling a deep sense of connection and relief. That night, the footsteps ceased, and the ghostly apparition was gone. The house felt different, lighter, almost serene, as if a burden had been lifted from its very foundation. We slept peacefully, the shadows that once haunted our nights now replaced by a comforting stillness. In the weeks that followed, life in the house returned to normal. The disturbances were gone, and the memory of Margaret's tragic story became a poignant reminder of the importance of compassion and understanding. Emma and Jack thrived in the peaceful environment, their laughter filling the house with genuine joy rather than the echoes of past sorrows. Years later, as I sit by the fireplace on another snowy Christmas Eve, I reflect on the winter that taught us the true meaning of home. The haunted footsteps that once echoed through our halls are now silent, replaced by the warmth of family and the enduring bonds that tie us together. Margaret Whittaker's spirit found the peace she sought, and in doing so, she helped us find our own. Living in that old wooden house in Vermont reinforced my belief that home is more than just a place. It's a sanctuary where love, compassion, and understanding can transform even the coldest spaces into warm havens. And as long as we remember and honor the stories of those who came before us, their spirits will continue to guide us. Their whispers a haunting yet beautiful melody that echoes through the ages. Story number 5. The Haunted Truck of Dalton Highway. I've always been drawn to the solitude that comes with long drives, especially through the remote stretches of Alaska's Dalton Highway. As a long-haul trucker, my life is a series of endless roads, vast landscapes, and the comforting hum of my rig beneath me. But some nights, the isolation of the highway feels less like a sanctuary and more like a void, swallowing me whole amidst the unforgiving winter. It was late December, and the storm had rolled in with a vengeance. The sky was a perpetual shade of gray, and the snowflakes danced wildly in the wind, reducing visibility to mere feet ahead. I had been on the road for days, hauling supplies to a mining camp that barely saw the light of day. Fatigue weighed heavily on me, but the promise of a warm meal and a soft bed kept me pushing forward. As I navigated the treacherous curves of Dalton Highway, my headlights cut through the blinding snow, revealing the ghostly outlines of trees bent under the weight of winter's fury. The radio was silent, save for the occasional crackle of static and weather updates predicting nothing but worsening conditions. That's when I saw it. A lone car stranded on the roadside, its windshield frost-covered and windows opaque. It was an old sedan, the kind that once cruised these roads but now seemed out of place against the stark wilderness. My curiosity piqued. I slowed down, the engine's roar muffled by the thick blanket of snow. Pulling over to the shoulder, I grabbed my flashlight and stepped out into the cold, the biting wind cutting through my jacket. The snow crunched beneath my boots as I approached the abandoned vehicle, its presence both eerie and unsettling. The car was oddly still, untouched by the storm, as if time had frozen around it. I circled the sedan, checking for any signs of life or distress. The door was locked, but the window was slightly ajar, allowing a faint glow from the interior to seep out. My hand hovered over the door handle, debating whether to take a closer look or leave the mystery unsolved. Just as I decided to turn back, a soft knocking echoed through the silence, reverberating off the snow-covered trees. Startled, I turned to see a figure standing a few feet away, barely visible through the blizzard. It was a man, dressed in tattered winter gear, his face obscured by the hood of his coat. His eyes met mine with an intensity that sent shivers down my spine. Without warning, he vanished into the storm, leaving me frozen in place. Heart pounding, I rushed back to my truck, the knocking now louder, seemingly coming from the windshield itself. My mind raced, trying to rationalize the apparition. Maybe a fellow driver seeking help, lost in the storm? But as I glanced around, there was no sign of anyone else, just the relentless snow and the haunting stillness of the night. Shaking off the unease, I climbed back into the cab, securing the doors tightly against the wind. The knocking ceased, replaced by an oppressive silence that pressed against the windows. I started the engine, the heater struggling to battle the cold that had seeped into the truck's interior. As I resumed my journey, the image of the ghostly man lingered in my mind. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me, following me through the desolate highway. The miles dragged on, each one stretching into an eternity of white and darkness. Suddenly, my headlights illuminated the same abandoned sedan, now miles away and seemingly untouched by time. My grip tightened on the steering wheel as the eerie familiarity of the scene washed over me. The knocking returned, louder and more insistent, emanating directly from my windshield. I dared to glance back, but once again, there was no one in sight, only the swirling snow that obscured any potential presence. Panic began to rise as the temperature inside the truck plummeted, my breath visible in the frigid air. The radio crackled to life, breaking the oppressive silence. A voice, distorted by static, warned of a blizzard intensifying rapidly, urging drivers to seek shelter immediately. Realizing the severity of the storm, I decided to turn back, retracing my route in the hope of finding a safer path. But as I navigated the treacherous roads, the knocking persisted, now accompanied by faint whispers that seemed to echo from the depths of the snow-covered woods. I pulled over to the side once more, the engine struggling against the cold. The knocking grew louder, more frantic, as if desperate to communicate. Summoning my courage, I approached the windshield, my flashlight cutting through the darkness. There, etched into the glass, were large, deep impressions, imprints of hands reaching out, grasping at something just out of reach. A sudden gust of wind slammed the truck doors shut, jolting me from my trance. The whispers intensified, forming indistinct words that sent chills through my very soul. I stumbled back to the cab, heart racing, and tried to start the engine. It sputtered and died, leaving me stranded in the middle of the storm with no way to call for help. Desperation set in as I realized the gravity of my situation. The knocking had ceased, replaced by an oppressive silence that seemed to press down on me. I fumbled with the keys, trying to revive the engine, but it was no use. The storm was relentless, and the darkness was absolute. As I sat there, shivering uncontrollably, a figure began to materialize outside the windshield once more. The same man from before, his form becoming clearer as he stood against the blizzard's fury. This time, there was no disappearing act. He remained, staring into my eyes with an unspoken plea. "Help me." His voice was a hollow whisper, barely audible over the storm. I couldn't respond, the fear paralyzing me. Memories of local legends about the Wendigo, a malevolent spirit known for luring travelers to their doom, flashed through my mind. Could this be the embodiment of those tales? The man's form began to shimmer, his edges blurring as the snow swirled around him. I felt a coldness seep into my bones, the weight of his sorrow pressing down on me. Determined to break free from the nightmare, I mustered the strength to speak. "I don't know how to help you," I whispered, my voice trembling. His expression softened, a look of profound sadness replacing the initial intensity. "You can help by remembering," he replied, his voice now clearer. "Remember my story, remember the pain, and let us find peace." With those final words, the man began to fade, the storm outside gradually subsiding. The temperature inside the truck warmed, the oppressive chill lifting as if a burden had been removed. The engine sputtered back to life, allowing me to restart my journey with a newfound sense of purpose. Driving through the remnants of the storm, I couldn't shake the feeling that the man's spirit had touched something deep within me. The highway, once a symbol of freedom, now felt like a pathway to understanding the unseen forces that govern our world. When I finally reached the nearest town, exhausted and emotionally drained, I vowed to uncover the truth behind the haunted sedan and the man who had lured me into the storm. Through conversations with locals and research into old records, I discovered the tragic tale of Daniel Brooks, a miner who had been caught in a blinding blizzard while driving home from the mines. Stranded and desperate, his car had become a tomb, his spirit unable to move on from the unforgiving winter that had claimed his life. Determined to honor his memory, I organized a memorial at the site where I had encountered him. We gathered friends and locals, lighting candles and sharing stories of those lost to the merciless Alaskan winters. As the ceremony concluded, a sense of peace settled over the area, the haunting presence of Daniel's spirit finally finding closure. Driving away from the memorial, I felt a profound connection to the land and its history. The Dalton Highway, once a mere route to my destination, had become a corridor of stories and spirits, each mile a testament to the resilience and fragility of the human spirit. Years later, the memory of that winter night remains etched in my mind. The haunted truck on Dalton Highway is no longer just a legend to me. It's a reminder of the unseen forces that shape our lives and the importance of remembering those who've been lost to the unforgiving embrace of nature. And sometimes, when the wind howls through the mountains and the snow blankets the road in silence, I can still hear the faint echoes of Daniel's plea, a haunting whisper that guides me through the darkest of storms. Story number 6. Whispers on Lake Michigan. Winter in Michigan was unforgiving. The snow lay thick upon the ground, and the ice on Lake Michigan was a treacherous mirror reflecting the pallid moonlight. My wife, Laura, and I had always cherished the solitude that the lake offered during these harsh months. It was our sanctuary, a place where the chaos of the world melted away, leaving only the crisp, biting air and the endless expanse of white. This year, however, something felt different. Perhaps it was the oppressive silence that hung over the landscape, or the way the wind seemed to carry whispers that vanished before I could make sense of them. Regardless, Laura and I decided to take advantage of the clear evening to go ice skating, a tradition we held dear despite the increasing dangers as the ice thickened. We laced up our skates and made our way to the shoreline, the snow crunching under our boots. The lake was a vast, frozen playground, illuminated by the soft glow of streetlights that dotted the perimeter. The air was sharp, our breaths visible in the frigid night as we glided across the smooth ice, laughter echoing into the stillness. As midnight approached, the temperature plummeted further, and the wind picked up, sending snowflakes swirling around us like specters. We decided to take a break, sitting on a bench to warm our hands by the faint light of a nearby lantern. The world seemed to hold its breath. The only sounds the distant howl of the wind and the gentle crackling of ice shifting beneath us. Suddenly, Laura tensed, her eyes fixed on the far side of the lake. "Do you see that?" she whispered, pointing towards the darkness where the ice met the trees. First, I saw nothing, just the inky blackness of the night and the faint outline of distant hills. But then, slowly, a faint glow began to materialize on the ice. As we watched, transfixed, the light took shape, revealing the ethereal silhouette of a young girl in a flowing white dress. Her form was translucent, shimmering under the moonlight, and she stood motionless, staring directly at us. My heart pounded in my chest as I felt an inexplicable pull towards her presence. "Laura, we should go," I urged, but she was already standing, taking hesitant steps towards us. Her movements were slow, deliberate, yet there was a grace to them that was almost otherworldly. The temperature seemed to drop even further, the air growing colder as she approached. We stood up, our instincts screaming for us to flee, but our feet felt rooted to the spot. As she drew nearer, I could see her face, pallid and sorrowful, eyes hollow with an eternal sadness. She extended a hand towards us, her fingers almost touching mine, and a chill unlike any I had ever felt surged through me. "Help me," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the howling wind. The words resonated deep within me, stirring a sense of compassion that overpowered my fear. Before I could respond, a sudden gust of wind whipped across the lake, and the girl vanished, leaving only the fading glow on the ice. We stood there, breathless and shaken, the memory of her sorrowful plea etched into our minds. Determined to understand what we had witnessed, we made our way back to the cabin, the snow now falling more heavily, obscuring our path. The next morning, the storm had passed, leaving the lake serene and still. Laura and I decided to investigate further, hoping to uncover the truth behind the ghostly apparition. We visited the local library, poring over old newspaper clippings and town records. It wasn't long before we stumbled upon a tragic story that mirrored our encounter. 50 years ago, during one of the coldest winters on record, a young girl named Emily Thompson had fallen through a thin patch of ice while skating with her family. Despite the frantic efforts to rescue her, she had succumbed to the freezing waters, her spirit believed to linger on the lake, forever searching for warmth and solace. As we delved deeper, we learned that Emily had been a vibrant child, beloved by all who knew her. The night of her death was marked by a fierce blizzard that left the town isolated and desperate. Her family had perished in the storm, their home consumed by flames that mirrored the fury of the winter. Locals spoke of seeing her apparition on moonlit nights, her presence a haunting reminder of the tragedy that had befallen her. Determined to bring peace to Emily's restless spirit, we decided to hold a memorial on the very spot where we had seen her. On a clear, cold evening, we returned to the lake, setting up a small cairn of stones and placing candles around it. We spoke softly, sharing Emily's story and expressing our desire to help her find the peace she so desperately sought. As night fell, the air grew still, the only sound the gentle lapping of snowflakes on the ice. We lit the candles, their flickering flames casting a warm glow against the darkness. As we finished our ceremony, the temperature seemed to rise slightly, the oppressive cold lifting as if acknowledging our intentions. For a moment, nothing happened, and we began to feel hopeful. But then, the faint glow reappeared, growing brighter and more defined. Emily stood before us once again, her expression now peaceful, a serene smile gracing her face. She reached out, her hand passing through the cairn, and a sense of calm washed over us. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice filled with gratitude. The warmth emanating from her presence enveloped us, dispelling the lingering shadows of her sorrow. Slowly, she began to fade, her form dissolving into the night as a gentle breeze stirred the candles. We watched in awe and relief as Emily's spirit found the peace she had long been denied. Her eternal search finally at an end. The lake, once a place of tragedy, now felt like a sanctuary of remembrance and healing. In the weeks that followed, the disturbances ceased entirely. The whispers and ghostly apparitions were gone, replaced by the tranquil beauty of a winter landscape untouched by sorrow. Laura and I continued to cherish our time on Lake Michigan, the memory of Emily's spirit serving as a poignant reminder of the enduring power of compassion and the importance of honoring those who have been lost. Years later, whenever I gaze out over the frozen lake, I think of Emily Thompson and the night we helped her find peace. The whispers that once echoed through the winter winds have been silenced, but her story remains, a haunting yet beautiful testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the bonds that transcend even death itself. Living by Lake Michigan taught us that some spirits linger not out of malice, but out of a longing for understanding and connection. And in helping Emily, we found not only a deeper appreciation for the fragility of life, but also a profound sense of purpose in honoring the memories of those who came before us. Story number 7. The Miner's Ghost of Colorado. I've always been drawn to the remnants of the past, to places where history lingers like a stubborn shadow refusing to fade. So when Jake suggested a weekend hunting trip to the abandoned mining town of Silver Peak in Colorado, couldn't resist. Nestled deep within the Rockies, Silver Peak had long been deserted, its once thriving mines now silent tombs buried beneath layers of snow and time. The allure of exploring forgotten places was too strong, and the promise of untouched wilderness was irresistible. Our group consisted of 5 friends: Jake, the adventurous leader; Sarah, the meticulous planner; Mike, the jokester who could lighten any tense moment; Laura, the pragmatic one with a knack for survival skills; and me, Alex, always eager to capture the essence of our adventures through my camera lens. We rented a small, weathered house on the outskirts of Silver Peak, its wooden frame creaking under the weight of countless winters. The house had a rustic charm, with a stone fireplace and large windows that framed the breathtaking, albeit desolate, landscape. The drive to Silver Peak was filled with excitement and anticipation. As we navigated the narrow, winding roads blanketed in fresh snow, the towering pines stood sentinel, their branches heavy with ice. By late afternoon, we arrived at the house, its isolation palpable. The nearest town was miles away, and the only signs of life were the distant calls of birds adapting to the harsh winter. After settling in, we spent the evening unpacking and familiarizing ourselves with the house's layout. The living room, dominated by the stone fireplace, was cozy enough to ward off the chill, and we quickly set up our sleeping arrangements. As night fell, the temperature plummeted, and the wind began to howl through the gaps in the wooden walls, creating an eerie symphony of creaks and groans. Around 11 p.m., as we sat by the fire sharing stories, a sudden silence enveloped the house. It was as if the storm outside had momentarily paused, leaving us in a heavy, oppressive stillness. I glanced around the room, sensing an unshakable unease that none of us could quite put our finger on. "Did anyone else feel that?" Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Before anyone could respond, a loud thud echoed through the house, originating from the hallway outside the living room. Our eyes darted towards the source of the sound, hearts pounding in our chests. Jake stood up, his expression tense, and motioned for the rest of us to follow. Cautiously, we approached the hallway, the only light coming from a single lamp flickering overhead. The snowstorm outside intensified, the wind now pounding against the windows like an angry beast. As we reached the doorway, we heard faint scratching noises, as if something or someone was clawing at the wooden walls. Jake slowly opened the door to the bedroom, flashlight in hand. The room was empty, the window firmly shut against the storm. "Probably just the wind," he muttered, but his voice lacked conviction. Relieved, we turned to leave, only to catch a glimpse of something or someone through the crack in the bedroom door. A shadowy figure stood outside, its form barely visible against the swirling snow. The silhouette of a man in a tattered cloak, his face obscured by darkness, stared intently at us. My heart skipped a beat as I watched the figure disappear into the night as quickly as it had appeared. "Did you see that?" I asked, my voice trembling. Everyone nodded, a silent agreement of shared fear. We rushed back to the living room, the atmosphere now thick with tension. Laura, ever the rational one, tried to calm us down. "Maybe it's just someone lost in the storm," she suggested, though her eyes betrayed her uncertainty. The rest of the night passed uneventfully, the earlier disturbances replaced by an uneasy silence. We tried to sleep, but the image of the cloaked man lingered in our minds, a haunting presence that refused to be ignored. The next morning, the storm had abated, leaving behind a serene but treacherous blanket of snow. Determined to understand what we had encountered, we ventured outside to inspect the house and its surroundings. The snow was undisturbed, no footprints leading away from the house despite the figure we had seen the night before. Confusion and frustration mounted. If he was real, why are there no footprints? Jake wondered aloud. Laura, digging through old records at the local library in the nearest town, uncovered the tragic history of Silver Peak. 50 years ago, during one of the harshest winters on record, the town had been home to the Thompson family, John, Mary, and their 2 children, Emily and Ben. The family had operated one of the main mines, a lucrative but dangerous business. One fateful night, a severe blizzard hit Silver Peak, trapping the Thompsons inside their home. Desperate to survive, John made the harrowing decision to take his own life and those of his family, leaving the town in mourning and the house forever marked by tragedy. The locals had long whispered about the restless spirits of the Thompsons, especially during the coldest nights when the wind carried their sorrowful cries through the pines. Some believed that John's spirit, tormented by his actions, wandered the woods, searching for redemption and unable to move on from his desperate choices. Armed with this knowledge, we returned to the house with a renewed sense of purpose. Determined to bring peace to the restless spirits, we decided to perform a memorial for the Thompsons, hoping that acknowledging their suffering might ease their eternal anguish. That evening, we gathered in the living room, lighting candles and placing fresh flowers on the mantel. We spoke words of remembrance and forgiveness, honoring the lives that had been tragically cut short. As we finished, a heavy silence settled over the room, the only sound being the gentle flicker of the candles and the distant rustle of the pines. Suddenly, the rocking chair in the corner began to move on its own, gently swaying back and forth despite the absence of any visible force. The air grew colder, the candles flickering as if reacting to an unseen presence. The shadows in the room seemed to deepen, taking on more defined forms, and the oppressive feeling returned with a vengeance. "Not yet," Jake whispered, his voice shaking. "We need to try something else." Determined not to give up, we decided to delve deeper into the history of the house, searching for any clues that might help us communicate with the spirits. We found an old journal belonging to Mary Thompson, detailing the final days before the tragic event. Her entries were filled with fear, desperation, and an overwhelming sense of hopelessness as the storm raged on outside. One entry stood out, written on the night of the incident. "I fear for our lives as the storm shows no mercy. John's despair grows, and I worry for our children's safety. If this is our end, may God forgive us." Understanding the depth of their anguish, we knew that simple acknowledgement wasn't enough. We needed to offer genuine compassion and perhaps find a way to help them find peace. That night, We returned to the living room, armed with Mary's journal and a renewed determination. We lit additional candles, the warm glow now reflecting our sincere intentions. We spoke softly, recounting Mary's words and expressing our desire to help them find the forgiveness and peace they so desperately sought. As we spoke, the room grew colder, the candles flickering violently before stabilizing into a steady flame. The air was thick with emotion, the weight of past sorrows pressing down on us. Then, the cloaked figure reappeared outside the window, his presence more defined yet still shrouded in darkness. This time, however, there was no fear in his stance, only a profound sadness that mirrored the pain we had uncovered. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice carrying the weight of decades of suffering. "Help us find peace." A surge of empathy washed over me. I realized that our actions had touched something deep within him, offering a glimmer of hope amidst the eternal winter of his torment. The oppressive chill began to lift, replaced by a sense of warmth and tranquility that enveloped the room. The next morning, the house felt different, lighter, almost serene. The disturbances had ceased entirely, the rocking chair now still and silent. We stepped outside, the snow glistening under the morning sun, feeling a sense of accomplishment and relief. The footprints from the night before were still absent, a sign that perhaps the spirits had finally found the closure they needed. In the days that followed, life in Silver Peak returned to a peaceful rhythm. The eerie presence that had haunted our nights was gone, replaced by the gentle sounds of nature and the comforting warmth of our home. Emma and Ben thrived in the tranquil environment, their laughter filling the house with genuine joy rather than the echoes of past sorrows. Years have passed since that transformative winter, and the memories of those haunting nights remain etched in my mind. The experience taught me that some places carry the weight of history so profoundly that the past refuses to stay buried, yearning for acknowledgement and understanding. By facing the darkness head-on and offering compassion, we can bridge the gap between the living and the dead, bringing peace to those who have been lost and healing to ourselves. Sometimes, when the wind rustles through the pines and the snow blankets the world in silence, I catch a glimpse of a faint silhouette by the window, a reminder of the souls we helped to set free. It's a testament to the enduring power of empathy and the belief that even in the most desolate places, there is always hope for redemption and peace. Living in that old wooden house in Colorado reinforced my belief that home is more than just a place. It's a sanctuary where love, understanding, and compassion can transform even the coldest spaces into warm havens. And as long as we remember and honor the stories of those who came before us, their spirits will continue to guide us. Their whispers a haunting yet beautiful melody that echoes through the ages.